For years, people have accredited Afrobeats, African fashion, and African film to Western validation. But according to Itohan Barlow, Senior Vice President of Rolling Stone Africa, we've been telling the story backwards. Today, African artists are selling out stadiums, luxury brands are collaborating with African designers, and African stories are reaching audiences like never before. But who owns that success? For Itohan, the next chapter isn't just about global recognition, it's about ownership, infrastructure, and ensuring Africa benefits from the culture it gives to the world. Can Africa turn cultural influence into economic power? What would it take for African creatives to own the industries they're shaping? Could culture become one of the continent's greatest competitive advantages? Find out in this episode of Black and Borderless. Itohan, thank you so much for joining us on Black and Borderless today. We are super excited to have you on.
Thank you for having me on. I'm also quite excited to do this. I don't do this very often. So it's nice to be able to talk about the continent and all the brilliant things that we do on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So fun story, like how I kind of learned of you or came across was on your, through LinkedIn. So, I'm always scouting LinkedIn for, new people from the continent, from the diaspora who are doing really awesome work. So that's kind of like when I'm not on the mic talking to people, that's what I'm doing, right? Looking for that. So I don't know how I came across your profile, but I think what really struck me about it, apart from the fact that you are obviously an SVP at Rolling Stone Africa, were your posts, kind of your POVs, these kind of think pieces that you're writing on, this soft power that's African creativity. So I really enjoyed all the pieces you were writing on LinkedIn, kind of your POV on the power of African creativity. And I thought this would be a really great person to have on Black on Borderless because I think we often touch on that topic here, but we haven't really had somebody that is well-versed in talking about African creatives and the power of that on a global scale. So that's what really excited me about it. And I'm glad we're chatting.
So am I.
So let's get right into it. I want to talk about kind of the vision, right? Because you are what they call a multi-hyphenate. You wear quite a few hats, but your two main hats, would be number one, as Senior Vice President of Rolling Stone Africa, and two, as the founder of Culture Lab Africa. So before I get into what those two roles are and what you do through those roles, I want to know, was there a particular moment when you realized that African creativity is entering a completely different era?
Ooh, I think, to be honest, I feel like that happened quite early. I remember when I went to boarding school in England, and I remember there was this one time I went to this huge department store, and it was like a luxury department store. So, I mean, you would go in there and just everything would just make you feel like you were in the best possible environment. And I remember I walked in and I heard them playing, I remember they were playing Two Face, like a song from Two Face. And I was so confused because I was like, what? Are they playing Nigerian music in like a store in London? Like not even just any store. It wasn't like some like African restaurant or like this is like a large like luxury department store, right? And so that moment for me really just carried because I feel like that was the first time I really understood that the things that we find valuable on the continent were also found valuable elsewhere, like outside of our continent as well. And after that, there's been so many sorts of micro moments where you just feel so proud of being Nigerian and so proud of holding on that to this type of heritage. And that for me, just it's always just been a thing where I've known that what we have is actually so valuable and so important. I had a flatmate who was British when I was at university. And I remember that she learned how to cook jollof rice from me. And then she went home, taught her mom how to cook jollof rice.
Yeah.
And then her mom would have these dinner parties and they'd be putting jollof rice on the menu. And so little moments like that while I've been growing up, especially not growing up in Nigeria, not growing up in Africa, but actually being like away in boarding school in a different country, but seeing so much evidence that like when people experience our culture, that there's something so alluring about it that they want to hold on to, they want to be a part of. I think that happened a number of times for me when I was young, and that really helped to form my opinion and my point of view and my standpoint in terms of how valuable our culture and our heritage really is.
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that. That kind of core memory of, hearing Two Face in a London department store. I suspect I know what store that is. I'm not gonna say the name because
It was
but
Selfridges.
which store, which department store was it?
Selfridges. Selfridges.
No, I thought you were gonna say Harrods, but okay.
Oh, you didn't tell us. I mean, Selfridges and Harrods are pretty much on par. But yeah, it was a moment because, like, yeah, those are not the kind of spaces that you would usually find like African culture or heritage being celebrated, especially not then. And this was, I mean, this is almost 20 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. And I was gonna, yeah, 20 years ago, hearing that, that I can imagine how striking that was.
Yeah.
I heard Davido on the radio in my car just by accident, maybe 6, 7 years ago, and I was blown away by that. So I can only imagine what that felt like hearing that 2 decades ago. So
Mhm.
let's talk a little bit about you. So you already touched on the fact that you didn't grow up in Nigeria. Tell me a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Who was Itohan before Culture Lab and Rolling Stone Africa?
So I think like growing up maybe can be a bit subjective in the sense that I would say like I lived in Nigeria and I went to school in Nigeria until I was about 13. And then I went to boarding school in England. And I feel like the growing up happened in England because when you're a young girl and you're taken away from what you consider to be home and you're in a different environment with a different set of cultural norms and you're surrounded by not many other Black people. And I mean, and all kudos to my mom because my boarding school I went to, we had a few Nigerian girls, so it wasn't completely like, you know, the other end of like the pond where you're completely isolated, but it was still much less than what you're used to. So I feel like there was a lot of growing up that I had to do. I feel I had situations where I would be maybe the only Black girl in the room, or I would have situations where people would laugh at you and giggle because of your accent, or they would laugh and giggle because, you know, you've gone home for the weekend, you come back with some F4 and you're warming it in the microwave, and everyone's like, "What's that smell?" So,
Mm.
you definitely experience quite a few of these microaggressions that tend to make you grow up. So for me, I say the growing up happened like in that period where I moved to the UK. Stayed in the UK, did my university there, and also then started working in the UK. I was working in the oil industry. I was working for an oil and gas company. Very conveniently, they also had a branch in Nigeria. And so I was, after being there a few years, I was like, hey guys, like I feel like I could go to Nigeria, like, and help out with the Lagos office. And they were like, sure, if you want to. So I ended up being able for a few years to have that back and forth as well, which I thought was super helpful in terms
Wow.
of just positioning me in a way that I was able to experience the continent and remain really connected as well. I had a background in architecture. So while I was in school, I was fiercely passionate about art, but also fiercely passionate about maths. So I think like in my A levels, like those are the two subjects that I did the best in. Like I got full marks in art, which is almost like unheard of because it's a subjective subject. But just to tell you like how my brain worked, like for me, the creativity was something that's always been there, but then also the sort of like analytical elements of
Mhm.
things also really interested and excited me. So
Mhm.
yeah, so I went on, did architecture at uni, and then ended up doing an interior and spatial design MA. And then I went to work in an oil and gas company. But then somehow the entrepreneurial bug kind of bit me, and I ended up creating my own design agency and then eventually then relocating back to Nigeria with that and building up, doing some really amazing work with a lot of different corporates within Nigeria.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that was sort of my trajectory, like before I then a couple of years ago stepped away to start Culture Lab, and also and then more recently joining Rolling Stone Africa.
Wow, no, that's a pretty inspiring story. So great. So you start this design agency, and then now you decide to start Culture Lab. So let's talk about that. What is Culture Lab, and what inspired you to start it at the time that you did?
Ooh, so I like to say that Culture Lab, we are pretty much like enablers. Like Culture Lab for me is this vehicle that I can use in so many different ways to essentially uplift our creative economy in West Africa. Usually, if you ever find me talking about our creative economy or creatives or designers or music or fashion, I always like to talk about West Africa because I feel, West Africa, we don't talk about West Africa as a region just enough, right? And we need to, regardless of the fact that it's Anglophone and Francophone, West Africa as a region, there's so many similarities, so many close relationships. My background, my father's father was Togolese, so I'm a quarter Togolese. I have a Togolese name as well. Mother's my mother's grandmother was Sierra Leonean as well. So I have a little bit of Sierra Leonean blood in me as well. And we have relatives who are Ghanaian as well. So I've always felt like I'm a child of West Africa, not just like Nigeria as a singular place.
Mhm.
And so with Culture Lab, I kind of wanted to have this platform where we could celebrate creatives, designers, makers, thinkers, doers, people operating within the creative sector. And we could really uplift the work they were doing. We could give them a platform through which we were able to do various things, whether it's supporting them with fundraising, whether it's helping them in terms of recording insights that they're getting from their communities, whether it's taking them, being able to take their brands and give them a global platform as well. And then within Culture Lab, we've done so many things over the years. We've helped with taking a musical about Obafemi Awolowo to the UK and having that shown in a UK theatre. We've done a cultural economic summit in the UK. We had the Emir of Kanu at that summit, as well as a lot of public officials as well, and a lot of institutional leaders as well. We've produced a national pavilion for Nigeria at the London Design Biennale. We also received an honorable mention as well for that pavilion. And in more recent times, at the end of last year, we launched a platform where we were able to collect a lot of data from young creatives in Nigeria. So it acted almost like a digital archive of what their needs were, what they needed from the future, what they were hoping, what kind of support they were hoping would be provided to them to help to support them within their roles and within their sort of like ambitions in the creative sector. And I think for me, there wasn't really an opportunity to do this kind of work within my design agency that I was running before. I knew I wanted to do work that had more impact. I knew I wanted to do work that would connect me with young people. And I knew that I wanted to do work that would help to place African creativity, African design, and African ambition on a global stage. And so Culture Lab really provided that opportunity to do that.
Essentially, you established Culture Lab, this creative consultancy, if I can call it that, that
Mhm.
basically allows African creatives, to be, placed on center stage or to be exposed to global markets, so to speak. So I want us to qualify what we mean by African creatives, right? Because maybe our viewers out there aren't, as familiar with the term, creative or what it means when we're talking about it here. So when we say creatives, we're talking about what? Filmmakers, musicians, fashion designers, any other categories that you guys cover when you think about like the creative space that you occupy
Right.
as a consultancy?
Even writers, people who are writing, storytellers, really
Hmm.
passionate about storytellers. But I would say the main ones for us, which you've already mentioned, would really be musicians, artists, and also fashion designers. I personally, because I have a design background, I will always work with designers. I will always find designers who I end up having these wonderful relationships with. And we
Hmm.
say let's create something together, because I feel like design is my passion, it's my fuel. And
Yeah.
so designers as well, those would be like sort of like the four main categories that we work with.
So, of all the categories you've worked with, or all the, let's say, creative talent you've worked with, can you name one really inspiring project you've worked in, or even artist or creative that you worked with that kind of has stuck with you? That when you wake up in the morning, you go, "Wow, I can't believe I got a chance to do this, and look at the impact that this had."
Ooh, so the one I'll mention this one because every opportunity I get to do anything, like to do a project, even small project, big project, I will always look for a way to include this brand. But there's a brand called This Is Us, right? And it's run by this amazing couple, OC and Oroma. And the reason why I love their brand so much is not really just because of like the storytelling, but it's also because like the founders genuinely live the brand, right? So
Mm.
they like the clothes they wear, and when the clothes their children wear, when they do campaigns for the brands, it's their friends, it's their family, it's their community, right? And they have essentially formed this relationship with a community in northern Nigeria that makes these amazing. They have these kofamata pits where you can get the like that's where the blue like indigo dyes that
Mhm,
are
mhm,
like
mhm.
so like historically popular across like a lot of West Africa. They work with this amazing community there, and they create these beautiful cotton dyed fabrics made with funtua cotton, which is like a local cotton. And there's so much like sustainability involved with their brand and what they do. So we've done a couple of things with them over the years. We've done a workshop with them in London, which is part of the summit we organized. And they really spoke about how sustainability is sort of at the center and core of what they're doing. We also did a workshop with them in Lagos where we were able to get a bunch of young people at Entertainment Week Africa take part in a session where they were actually dyeing like these bandanas and personalizing and customizing them as well. And for me, it wasn't just the beauty of seeing young people generally like really engaged in creating something themselves, but it was also the fact that like there were people who were asking questions and trying to understand the brand and understand the story behind the brand and understanding the importance of this almost lost tradition that
Mhm.
brands like This Is Us are able to help sustain,
Yeah.
right? Because they
Mhm.
have this core belief, right? That, their Africanness, their Nigerians, the things that make us who we are, right, are important and need to be preserved. So they would be like my star brand. I would say that I just love interacting with, working with, and always have over the years.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a really cool and awesome project. So, what is the outcome of the end goal of that, right? So you have a client like This Is Us. Is the end goal, how are you measuring success? Is it by, these projects you're doing for them? Is it sales? Is it exposure, engagement? What are kind of the premier prime metrics to measure um, the impact that you deliver for these African creative brands?
Yeah. So when we have two different types of people we work with. So we might work with someone in a client capacity, and then we're like either designing for you, we're building for you. It's very like practical, we're almost acting as like a design consultancy in the work we're doing for you, but with that sort of like knowledge and background of being really aware of the direction of what's happening in the creative sector. The other way we work with clients, which is what This Is Us would fall under, is less of a client relationship, but more of partnership, in the sense that we've identified a brand that has really strong values which are very similar to us, and we want to work together to help support that brand to essentially have a wider reach and create more impact and work with more people who we feel are aligned with the brand's vision and mission, right? So This Is Us would
Mhm.
fall more in that category. When you talk about measuring success, I would say like a really one of the projects that we've worked on that I would say we had a really good measure of success would be with the musical that we took to the UK. So the musical was called Our, and it was sold out in the UK. So all their shows were sold out, and it was a brilliant musical. And everyone who saw it was really happy and really excited. Now, we worked with them to bring them into the UK and for them to enter that market. And we also, and since then, they've gone on to do a show every year since,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so for me, the measure of success there is that, we were able to do this thing so successfully. We were able to connect them with the right marketing agencies. We were able to give them advisory on the visuals for the marketing. We were able to do the invites as well. We were able to manage that process of their VIPs and who was in the room. And in the
Yeah.
end, then had a really successful outcome, which is that every year since, they've been able to take another play or another musical to the UK.
So I want to talk about like what inspired you to just say, you know what, I want to start this creative consultancy. What gap were you seeing in the creative ecosystem in Africa that made you feel something needed to actually be built?
So the gap, I don't know if it was a gap that I saw, right? But I mean, we're often told like, you identify where like a problem or something, and then you go in and create the thing that's going to be the solution, right? But for me, it was more so, I would say, an annoyance, right? Which is that um there's this rhetoric that just exists everywhere, which is that, creatives, we're not business minded, you know, creatives don't know how to turn their passion into real business. You can't invest in creatives because, they're going to take your money and run away. And while I can imagine that, there might be some truth to the fact that there are creators who probably people may have invested in and, it didn't turn out successful. Well, there's loads of tech companies who've been invested in and they didn't turn out successful. And VCs continue to pump more and more money into these companies, right? No one is saying like, oh, can't trust the tech guys because they're just going to take away your money. No, VCs will in fact will literally invest multiple times over with one founder because they believe in that founder. Even if he has 2 failed projects already, they'll still invest for the third one because they know, like,
Absolutely. Uh-huh.
do you get what I mean? So
Yep.
why
Yep.
isn't that same grace applied to the creative sector? Why don't we look at creators with that same type of, and then people might argue, okay, well, the returns, if you get it right with investing in tech, is really, really huge, right? Because you have this product that can scale really quickly. But then what I think is like missing, or the thing that annoys me, is that we try to measure the impact of the creative sector in the same way we measure impact across other sectors. But oftentimes you can't really do that because the impact of the creative sector, whether it's changing perceptions, right? Whether it's like reinforcing an identity, whether it's making an investor who wants to come to Nigeria and invest in agriculture feel like he knows us a little bit better because, oh, he's watched this Nigerian film that was really funny, or he loves this Nigerian poet, or like, Fela is his favorite artist. All those things matter. All those perceptions, all the things that make people trust us as Nigerians. Guess what? They're not trusting us because, they saw the numbers from how much the farm was producing. No, they're trusting it. We're human beings. They're trusting it based on like the Nigerians that they've come in contact with via their screens, right? Or through the press. And a lot of the times, like when we make the news, it's through the creative sector. That's why we're making the news. That's why people know us. Loads of my
Yeah.
friends know who Davido is. They might not know who Aliko Dangote is, but they'll know who Davido is. Do you get what I mean? When they're working on business, they'll be like, oh, I have a Nigerian friend. Yeah, she's really cool. She took me to go eat some J rice. So we need to be able to, and I think it has to come also from like a policy, like government level, like that appreciation, that value that is really applied towards the creative industry, and the ways in which we measure what success means, right? I think that needs to be a whole different conversation, and it needs to be the long game. So we need to say, okay, for the next 20 years, right, we want to invest in all sorts of people who are doing work across the creative sector, whether it's a blog they want to start, whether it's a cooking show, whether it's this, whether it's that, because we're so creative, we're so talented. Imagine if people were just funded, like the idea of Nigeria that would be created, right? When you go anywhere else, it would literally just be, oh my gosh, they're so creative. Nigeria is the most creative, talented place. And then guess what? Our creators are going to benefit from that. Our economy is going to benefit from that. So for me, that annoyance of like how the creative sector is viewed, how creatives are viewed, is really what pushed me away from more of like the corporate design kind of environment. And like we used to do a lot of like sustainability reports, and that was like our jig. But I wasn't as excited to be doing that as I am now, excited to be working within this sector and genuinely trying to build platforms, build infrastructure that supports the growth of the creative sector in West Africa as a region.
And I think my theory, my take on it is that the reason why the creative industry has been looked at as, especially in Africa, as an industry that doesn't have a ton of ROI is mostly because of how we view creativity in African culture. It's almost viewed as a hobby. When we think about, the generations before us, anyone who, in generations before us who had kids who wanted to be in the creative industry, that was a no-no, right? It was seen as like a hobby or a form of entertainment. And I think Black people at large have been trying to shun this creative label because it's associated with so many stereotypes as well, right? That we're known for being entertainers, but we're limited by other groups because we're seen as only entertainers. So I think for a while we've been kind of trying to get away from the creative label because it's tied to so many stereotypes about Black people, about Africans, right? Well, all we know how to do is to party, entertain, and play music. Um,
Mm,
Not realizing that it's actually our superpower. So instead of kind of trying to get away from the image of being a creative, how do we take that and do what you are talking about, which is turn it into soft power, turn it into
mm,
power that also grows other industries, right? Because we connect with people creatively, we get people to pay attention to us through our creative, and then we now bring them into tech and these other non-creative industries. So I think it's all a perception thing. I think we are coming to terms with the fact that we are inherently creative people, or that we have a ton of talented creatives, and that's nothing to be ashamed of or seen as we're just partiers and entertainers. It's to be taken and converted into power that we can leverage to boost other industries, if that makes sense.
yeah, 100%. Completely agree.
So to that point, I think we're getting there. In 2026, I think we're in a space where, thanks to people like you, our governments are even starting to see that creativity is a superpower for Africa, and that African creatives should be supported and celebrated and invested in. I see that. Like I was at a conference in Atlanta last year, and there was a panel with government officials talking about how to leverage the creative economy, how to invest in it and support it. So I
Mm,
see that change happening. And again, I think it's due to people like you who are creating, putting creatives on center stage and showing that creative can be good business, right?
mm,
So now, especially on the global stage, we do have, the Davidos, the Whiz Kids of the world out there being kind of these ambassadors for
mm.
Africa to the world. And people are listening and they're paying attention. The West is paying attention to African creativity. Why do you think African fashion, music, film, and art are receiving this level of global attention now?
So, I mean, there's a t-shirt my cousin got for me about maybe like 15, 18 years ago. And she got it from Gallery Lafayette as well. So such a random place to get this t-shirt from. But the t-shirt said, Africa is the future, right? And she bought about 20 of these t-shirts and she gave it out to all her family, friends, everyone. So I got this, still have this t-shirt till today. But I think what's important to note is that
Mm.
we've known that Africa is the future because again, the signs were starting to show, right? There were these little kind of like bubbles that were of within the entertainment industry, within fashion, where people were really looking to Africa and trying to see how they could be inspired, right? I want to say how they could be inspired instead of like how they could steal, right? Because very how they could be
No,
inspired.
inspired. Yeah,
Yeah, from
inspired.
that, we have like the Stella McCartneys and the Louis Vuittons but there's always been that thing of like being inspired, right, by African creatives and African art. I think what has really happened that has almost signaled a more significant change over the last 10 years has probably been the fact that with Africa, and something that's almost the opposite should have been happening, but it hasn't. And that goes to show the strength of our creative sector. But you have globalization, which is like increasing, right, rapidly, because people can travel to other places quicker, because, you know, the world is more mobile, because we all have our phones in our hands. So, you know, young people in Nigeria, they open their phones and immediately they can be watching like a rapper in America, like, and you guys, so regardless of the fact that with African culture, we now have more access to other cultures, right? What we're seeing is not like this kind of like effect where, because we're now losing more of our culture because people are essentially able to be influenced by foreign culture a lot quicker. What we're finding is that with a lot of the creative sector sort of pillars like fashion, music, film, right? Young people who have seen artists like Two Face becoming popular on a world stage, like D'banj, right? Young people are now almost more encouraged, right? To say, hey, I want to produce stuff that's more authentic and more like culturally attuned to like who I am and to my identity, right? And what that means is that, you know, instead of young people saying, hey, it's much easier for me now to go and shop online and get stuff from a department store in London or wherever, they're saying, hey, no, I want to buy like a locally made designer because that's the flex. I want to listen to African music because that's the flex, right? It's not that this has happened now, it's that it's been building. So like the shift in like the way people think, right, and the mentality that our young people have towards their own culture, it's been shifting. The only area that I think like needs to have that same sort of like resurgence is probably with our language, because that's the only thing that still is like we're still losing, right? And less and less people continue to be able to speak their languages from Africa, which is unfortunate. But with everything else, with music, with fashion, with film, with art, you have people who want to be more African. They're proud of their heritage. They understand that this unique identity gives them a unique advantage in the world. And the more we're proud of ourselves as well, I feel like the more the world notices and they want to tap into that. They're like, oh, look, we can see the attention there. Because previously, I feel we were underestimated. People have consistently, and even till today, consistently underestimate the demand and the interest in things that come from Africa, whether it's our films, they consistently underestimate. There was the Parrots Analytics report that came out recently that just showed just how much of an interest there is from people in America for content that's basically from the continent. And that makes a brilliant case to say like, hey, invest a bit more in the continent, because hey, there's actually people who want this kind of content when it comes to film. So yeah, sorry, I'm going on and on now.
No. This is good. I hear you on that, right? But I think your theory is interesting because I haven't heard it explained this way before. You're almost saying that you think the pride in being African preceded the West's interest in African creativity. Usually people talk about it the other way around, that the West started taking interest in African creativity, and as a result, Africans became more proud of showcasing their authentic Africanness. But you're almost talking about it the other way around, that no, it started kind of like as an innate pride, and then that the West saw that and thought, oh, that's great. Oh, look, if they're so confident in who they are and their authenticity, then we need to pay attention. Is that kind of the order you're putting it in? That we became proud first and then the West paid attention? Or did the
Of
West
course.
start paying attention? And because we were paying attention and we saw the money that it was making, we decided to start being proud in who we were.
No, I don't believe that at all. I think I feel like it's definitely been the other way round, because even with Nigeria, for example, like the reason why like Nigerian fashion has become what it is today, when you think about Nigerian fashion designers, and it's not because like, oh, like we, you know, people started selling their things outside of Nigeria. And then more designers thought, hey, I can actually know it's because like within Nigeria, people were actually so skillful, like even like the tailors, and like they started designing stuff for Nigerians to wear to weddings in Nigeria,
Mhm.
right? If you look at like Ashrabi culture, for example, like
Yeah.
those designs, like it wasn't built from a demand that came from the West, right? This was built for us. Like that's
Mhm.
where that came from. And then that led to all the, you know, all the prom dresses being ordered, and like people in the States wanting to order prom dresses from Nigeria.
Mhm.
And even if you look at like historically, when you look at the people who were most defiant and who were most proud, like someone like Fela, for example, right? And he had a lot of like global and international fame and accolades being thrown at him because he was so defiant. He was so proud of who he was. He
Mhm.
was unapologetically Nigerian. So I think there's a lot to be said about, you know, the mentality that goes along with what we're creating. And I think
Yeah.
that confidence as well, us being able to be ambassadors, us making a choice to wear Nigerian, to wear West African designers, that has definitely helped, I would say, in terms of like painting this image of like, we need to pay attention to what is happening in West Africa, in Africa as a
Mhm.
whole. And a lot of brands are doing that now.
Mhm.
Some of them are doing it very quietly. Like we've had people reach out to us and they're like, hey, we'd like some insights on very like bizarre, like weird sectors that I would be like, what is the interest for you there? But so I know that these, you know, these Western companies, they are looking deep into Africa. By 2050, 1 in 4 people will be Black or of African descent, right? Um, if they're not the same thing. I know there's a whole thing about whether it's or not it's the same thing. But yeah, so we have, so you know, it's a large number. If you imagine that 1 of every 4 people will have a reason to want to connect or want to plug in
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
with Africa, it's yeah,
Yeah.
brands they have to pay attention. They have to take note.
Yeah. No, the West is definitely Western brands are definitely seeing the numbers. And I always say that Western brands respond to money and to numbers. And when they look at the youth numbers, to your point, that the youth population is will primarily be in Africa. They're definitely paying attention for that reason. But I also don't want to discount I think the role of the diaspora in pushing African creativity in the West, right? When you
Mhm.
think about African immigrants living in the West or even African Americans, I think they've had a large role to play also in kind of being cultural ambassadors for the culture in the West. You know, you shared the story about your flatmate, you know, you teaching your flatmate how to make jollof rice. In that sense, you're a cultural ambassador, right? You're in England teaching, you know, someone who probably had never been on the continent how to make something. So I think that's also played a huge role in the last 2 decades, and also creating this intrigue about African creativity and African culture by Westerners. I think the diasporans have also, you know, been really strong ambassadors. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm overstating the role of diasporans in pushing African culture abroad?
So, I mean, I love that you brought up the diaspora conversation, because that is something that I also find really, I think it's such an important piece of the entire puzzle when we talk about what we're trying to achieve on the continent. Um, with so, for example, I'll give you an example with Rolling Stone Africa. One of the things that we are very passionate about is also making sure that diaspora stories get told, right? Because so often there's almost like a divide where people you talk about when you talk about African storytelling or like African stories or like African creativity,
Mhm.
people almost want to shun or like, you know, turn away from people who are in the diaspora because it's like, well, oh, where do they live? Do they live here? Where are they? People, you know, you use that as a differentiator.
Mhm. Mhm.
You use that as a differentiator as to whether or not someone is actually like a legit African. I think another important role that the diaspora plays as well is when we think about like the economic futures for Africa as well, like for many countries as well. The future is also tied to diaspora reconnecting as well. Um, there are people who are doing amazing work across the continent. For example, like Boris Kojo is really leading the charge in terms of having people in the diaspora reconnect with the continent, people come in to invest in Ghana. And, he's taking their tourism numbers, like they skyrocketed their tourism numbers because of people like him who have been so committed to the diaspora reconnecting. In Nigeria as well, like we have a huge interest from the diaspora, especially around December. I know the Ministry
Mhm.
of Tourism as well. They are currently really trying and doing a lot to decentralize that tourism calendar. So there's tourism throughout the year, not just in December. But they act as well as a huge source of sort of like economic relief as well for a lot of the sort of like businesses that exist on the continent. They buy from West African designers, they listen to the music, they attend concerts, these are all things that help to uplift and really, really amplify what our creatives are doing as well.
I agree as a diaspora, and I'm sure a lot of our viewers out there agree. And so, viewers, listeners, we want to hear your thoughts. What do you think the diasporans' greatest role is in, advancing and promoting African creativity out there on the global stage? So, Itohan, I think we talked a lot about the diaspora, but I want to kind of go back to something we're talking about. I think this is a really, really powerful point, and I don't want to lose this. So in a recent LinkedIn post, you mentioned how global South artists like Bad Bunny out of Puerto Rico, and then out of Nigeria, Wizkid and Asake, are no longer adapting their brands to fit Western ideals. And like you said, one could say, yeah, people have been doing that for decades. Fela did that to a certain extent. But I think I want you to talk about why this time it's different. Why is, you know, Asake doing songs purely in Yoruba to a Western audience? Why is Bad Bunny doing songs or going to Super Bowl and doing songs only in Spanish to an American audience? Why do you think we've gotten this bold, right? Like, what is driving that?
The reality is that these things are now becoming like very mainstream. The world is becoming less of a white place in general everywhere. So the fact is that what we were previously led to believe that, we often would be almost told to like, we were niche. Do you get what I mean? Like, it was always like, there's a space for you, but it's a
Mhm.
niche. But that's not the case anymore. Now, like West African fashion designers are mainstream. Now, West African musicians, artists are mainstream. They're no longer being positioned in this sort of like in this way where like it's for a chosen few who might relate or might everyone wants to consume this content, right?
Mhm.
And because like there is now like zero barrier as well, because anyone can go on a TikTok or can go and they can literally like tap into African culture. What you're finding is that audiences don't care. These brands and these consumers, right? They don't need to go to Selfridges and say like, hey, please can you play my music? And Selfridges says, oh, we have a very select clientele and we don't really know if no, because online they can already see their audience and their fan
The
base. They
numbers.
already know that people in Europe don't care if they're singing along to like a song that they made for a Lagos audience because they've seen it travel and they've seen the response it's had when it's traveled, right? So
Yeah.
now when they do want to make global moves and they do want to really tap in to that global market. They're no longer worried about like, will it fit? Oh, I'm now a big star and I now want to like expand my reach. So I have to make myself more X, Y, Z or the other. No,
Yeah.
they don't need to do that because they already know they have that audience. They
Yeah.
already have that information. The data is there for them to see it themselves in terms of where their communities are being formed online, how it's growing. And so I think that makes it a lot easier for our artists to not want to water down and not feel like they have to present part of the picture. They can show up authentically as they are, present themselves exactly as they are in the exact same way that they would present themselves to an audience at home.
I agree. But I also think that that wasn't the case 10 years ago. And I think Wizkid is a perfect example of that. I think Wizkid went through an era where he was, because he's kind of an earlier wave, but he
Yeah.
came into the scene, much earlier. There was a time when he was trying to kind of water it down for a Western audience. I think based on where how I see his work evolving lately, he's reverting back to his roots.
Yeah.
Because he's seeing that he doesn't need to do that in this current market. That doesn't need to happen. You can go back to kind of your authentic, unfiltered African roots in your music and still sell records, essentially.
Mhm. Yeah.
So we've already established that, we don't need to, filter ourselves anymore for the world, right, as African creatives. But despite the world's growing appetite for African creativity, it sometimes feels like the world consumes African culture faster than it actually understands Africa itself. Have you witnessed that tension firsthand?
Yeah, I would say that I've witnessed that in a lot of different ways. I remember I had a really good friend who, not had, she's still a really good friend of mine, but she's Irish. And I remember her asking me, she said, "Oh, I want to just, clarify something with you." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And like, I mean, at this point, I've known her for maybe like 15 years or something. And she was like, "Do you prefer being called African American or Black?" And and I said to her, I said, why would I want to be called African American? And she was like, "Oh, I don't know. I just want to know what like the PC term for it is. Or is it like African, like Black, or like African American?" And it
Hmm.
just struck me that like even with like her proximity to like me and like to African, West African culture and like our food, our music and everything, right? Sometimes as well, like there's just, people generally will only know what they know. And like if they're not being educated, if they're not being, given more of the full picture, then they might not learn, right? And so I think it's gonna be a situation where we have like African culture being exported so quickly in so many different ways to all ends of the earth, right? And but that on its own is not necessarily going to be like the thing that informs the world about Africa, right?
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
it can do, for example, is it can pique people's interest. So they want to find out more and they go and they Google or they ask Chat GPT and they try and genuinely like engage and understand things. Maybe they see someone using a word under an Instagram post and they're like, "Oh, what language is that?" They go and find out like, what language does a Shaka speak, right? And they find out. So people naturally can find out more about being African or like our culture through that. But we can't expect like just like the creative sector on its own to be that like the full information source. Something that I found really painful when we were doing the Biennale was just the lack of like information that exists online about certain, like we had focused in on this region in Nigeria called Ledger, which shows like these really ancient like iron ore production facilities that existed, like even, and this was like way before like even Britain had the capability to produce iron, and we were doing this in Nigeria. But when you go online and you look for like images, you can't find any good images. When we
Mm.
went and we looked for a map and we wanted to find a map online that had all the like key sites in that area, like the spiritual sites, the schools, that we couldn't find a map that had that. We had to create our own map for that. And so for me, it's really, I think we need to do a way better job of even like recording, our culture, our heritage, who we are, in a way that people can easily have access to. So that's a completely different sort of task and role that sits with various different government bodies who should be responsible for doing that, but possibly not. That's not necessarily a priority at the moment, but I think it's a huge priority because the more we continue to expand through the creative sector, the more people are going to want to find out about different things that have to do with our country. And sometimes there's just really not enough information online, or the quality of information, like the images are just, if you go online and you search for like men in kilts, right? You'll
Mhm.
probably get like at least like 500 images, and at least half of those will be very like good quality images. If you do the same for like for a Nigerian like tradition, like a man in traditional Ishekui wear or something, like you probably get like quarter that number, and then out of the quarter probably only like 3 images or 1 image would be actually like, you know high definition enough. And then when you think about it and you think about all these like massive language learning models as well that are being used to train AI, right? What happens is that when the information just isn't online, doesn't exist, then you have a very like limited pool of information that technology will be using to essentially like inform people who are researching us,
Yeah.
research our culture, researching how we live, researching our identity. So I think that's a problem that still needs to be solved separately from the creative sector.
Yeah, yeah, I agree, right? It's almost like the step 2, right? The step 1 is, okay, great. We've successfully made African creativity cool globally, and people are interested and they're intrigued. Now, how do we convert that interest in our food, our music into more substantial interest in our culture and more substantial interest in our politics, our technology, so how does it lead to other industries? Like one thing that I've noticed a lot, and this is not like a knock on anyone who's interested or who's Pan-African, because even I sometimes suffer from this as a diasporan, is that, okay, so we're all proud of being Africans in some sense, right? We've waved the flag on Independence Day here in Houston, for Nigeria and all these other places. But you'd be surprised how many people who are Pan-African or have this pride in having ties to Africa know very little about the geopolitical landscape of Africa, who
Mm-hmm.
can who they've been to Ghana many times but can't really tell you who the government officials are or kind of what the political landscape of that is. And I will say that at some point, I'm guilty of that too myself to a certain extent. I think right now the interest in Africa is still a little bit superficial and shallow. It's there, but it's only at a, kind of an entertainment, music, food culture level, but we need to go a little bit deeper and a step into it. And I think that's kind of where you're kind of getting at to a certain extent.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think like even and that also I mean this conversation has been ongoing. I see lots of people like talking about this, like whether it's like making payments between African countries and like how does
Mhm.
that become an easier process? And you have great companies like Paystack and Flutterwave who are now like really taking the charge with like making payments a lot more seamless, not just like with between Africa and the rest of the globe, but also within Africa as well. And then you also have this conversation around travel as well. And I guess this is less sort of relevant for the diaspora, but like even within Africa, like how are we making sure that people can travel a lot easier
Mhm.
within Africa? You're not having to do a 16-hour flight to get
Yeah.
from West Africa to East Africa, because that in itself is already a deterrent, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
the age-old conflicts that exist as well between like Nigeria and Ghana. All those things, like a lot of the times it's just like fun and games. But I think there is a need for us to we just all need to be like a lot more unified. We need to look at how we can essentially like promote our culture within like there needs to be a huge sense of Pan-Africanism. And I think that it's slowly sort of like coming back as
Yeah.
well. And yeah, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. No, I'm also here for it. I'm not gonna do the clock it thing because I can't do it right, but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna
Is it
try
that?
to.
I don't know how I think it's that.
Is it these two fingers? Okay.
I
Okay. So, I want to talk about who's actually profiting or who's actually benefiting financially from African creativity, right? Currently, and who should be in the future. So, when African creativity becomes globally profitable, who do you think is benefiting the most right now? Like, whose pockets are being filled right now when it comes to African
so
creativity's increased popularity?
so I think first of all, it's not like when African creativity becomes popular. I think like we
Yes, yes.
already are profitable. I read this I was reading an article the other day about this Harvard report that came out, and it said that Nigeria, like Nigeria, the home of Afrobeats. No one come for me, but yeah, the home of Afrobeats. The guys who brought you Ashake, Wizkid, Burner, Tiwa Savage, Rima, us, that we are the country that collects the least royalties in the whole world.
Wow.
And I was like, that surely cannot be true. Like, how are we collecting the least royalties? Like, when we have so much talent for music, it seems wild, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so that is just, and and it's like, okay, so we have this information. Okay, now what? What do we do with this information that we have, right?
Mhm, mhm,
How do we, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like we need the president to come out and say, like, this is absolutely not right. We're
yeah,
setting up, a government fund to fund anyone who is looking, like, are there law firms who are looking to, like, start a whole entire department that helps protect these artists and helps to
mhm,
make sure that they go back historically and look at, what are the royalties that are due to Nigerians, and, like, what kind of contracts exist that prevent them from getting royalties. Because it just, as I said, I'm in Selfridges and I'm hearing them playing Two Face on the overhead, like, music system, and then we're the country that collects the least royalties. It just doesn't add up. So
yeah.
I think, and I don't know the ins and outs of why or how that survey was done, but I think that that is an alarming statement to come from it. And I think we need to do more about protecting ourselves and protecting our creative work as well. And a
Mhm.
lot more needs to be done.
So I guess I would almost kind of, turn that back on you to a certain extent, right? So you're SVP at Rolling Stone, which is a major media platform for the creative industry, right? Um, what role are creative execs like you playing in ensuring that African creators are getting the money due to them?
So there's a couple of things we are doing at the moment. And a lot of the work that we do, I know we're a publication, and when, people often are a bit confused when they hear about some of the things we're doing, because they're like, oh, aren't you guys just a magazine? But Rolling Stones historically has always been more than just a magazine. And with
Mhm.
Rolling Stone Africa, for us, wherever there's an opportunity to be involved um, in, like, building the infrastructure that allows these industries to compete on a global stage, we want to be involved. We have conversations with governments, with, and not just, like, on a sort of, like, surface level, like, hey, we want to come in. We're actually like, how do we support you with your tourism objectives? How do we support you with your fashion industry? How do we make sure that your designers have access to global platforms that can also help to amplify them and train them? And so there's a lot of work that we do that's not just entirely focused on just the storytelling. A lot of that is also, like, looking at the infrastructure, looking at the role we can play in terms of bringing people together and giving people access as well, based on our relationships that we have. We're also super passionate about spotlighting the next generation as well. Traditionally, a lot of people don't get the opportunity to be featured on these kind of platforms because they haven't made it yet. We actually make a point to go out and look at where is the next, like, talent pool, where's the next talent rising up from, and we go into those communities, we go into those those areas, those regions. We speak to locals, and we try to constantly amplify work. Every Friday we do a spotlight on a new designer. Every Sunday we do another spotlight. And a lot of the time, it's not, we're doing this because we're passionate about, spotlighting these people and giving them an opportunity to build and grow.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I think executives in the creative space like yourself or holding these kind of high positions in the creative industry in Africa are best positioned to fight for African creators to not only be promoted globally because they're already popular globally, but to make sure they're getting paid what they're supposed to get paid. Because you, as a creative executive, you understand the business and the creative aspect of it. You're kind of marrying those two worlds, right? So there's no better person to speak to why, an African artist should be getting more in royalties than they are currently getting. So I'm glad to hear that, the organization you work for, in this case, Rolling Stone, is already working towards that to some extent. So let's talk about the future a little bit, Itohan. I want to kind of touch on kind of projecting forward, what is in the future in the cards for the African creative industry. Number one, how can those of us in the diaspora become better advocates for African creators who are not getting what is due to them?
Ooh, I would say just like the diaspora does a really good job of supporting African creatives. I would say just keep on supporting them, keep on patronizing them, keep on sharing, keep on amplifying through your own platforms where you have an opportunity to work with an African creative when you're well positioned in a role, whether that's in the diaspora or even back home. But wherever you do have a position where you are able to recommend someone who is from the diaspora, um, and of African heritage or even on the continent, please recommend them. Like, because there's so many opportunities that we already lose, even though we are well qualified for it.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
kind of spirit of like really just like being able to like recommend people who are qualified, but maybe wouldn't have that opportunity otherwise. I think it's always a really fantastic thing to be able to do that. Um, yeah, I think that would be it. I think sometimes as well we're very quick to judge uh, to judge, yeah, especially the diaspora. Sometimes we're very quick to judge like African brands, and this is
Mm,
within fashion. So when something does not go well, when there's a t-shirt that has a little rip in it or like the thing is coming off, right, you find the time to go and call them out online, right, and not
mhm.
necessarily in the kindest way, right. And I saw this happen quite recently, and I was really impressed that the brand in question, this is the Africa brand, they went in and the way they handled it so gracefully, so politely, their
Wow.
customer service, so despite the fact that this person was literally like just quite aggressive in how she chose to, talk about the brand. And I was like,
Mhm.
we need more of this. We need this less confrontational from the African brands and more just like, I'll handle this and keep moving. Because I assure you, if that person bought shoes from, their local, like, I don't know what stores you guys have in America, but like in England, I would say like their local like M&S, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Not gonna go and start like insulting the brand online because
mhm.
quite frankly, like no one would care, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it was like a 70 pound, the equivalent of like a 70 pound t-shirt. But like for African designers, people are bothered by that because they're like, how dare you charge this amount?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this is what I got,
yeah,
right? But why shouldn't they charge that amount? Because guess
yeah.
what? That designer who's designing, most times, like the reason why you've bought it is because the designer's really good, right? And for a large part, yes, mistakes happen, but they have significantly invested in their marketing,
Mhm,
in building a team, in a store, and they don't even have the same kind of investment that their counterpart would have in the States, right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
most of this is them investing their own cash or
mhm,
investing based on family and friends funding them. So the next time we want to like, I feel like the next time, an African designer maybe lets you down, approach the brand directly, have a conversation. If they
mhm.
haven't, there's no brand in the world that's perfect.
Yeah.
If they don't handle it well, then sure, maybe you do want to go online and make a TikTok or an Instagram video on it, but give them a chance. Give them a chance because they are operating against some incredible challenges and still making it work.
I love that message. So to our viewers out there, if you're giving Louis Vuitton a chance to mess up and then you
Mm,
still go purchase and patronize them, give African brands a chance. No one is perfect, you know. Um,
exactly.
and we do that all the time with Western luxury brands. We give them multiple chances to, you know, exploit our communities and speak out against us or to get things wrong in their marketing. So we should extend the same grace to African brands while still holding them accountable for
Yeah.
producing great products. No,
Yeah.
I think that's a really powerful message. Um, Still in the spirit of looking in the future, in that same spirit of looking in the future, Nigerian and South African creators have dominated much of the global conversation when it comes to African creativity. What brand or artist from another part of Africa that's not Nigeria or South Africa do you think the world is currently overlooking or sleeping on?
Ooh, overlooking or sleeping on. Oh gosh. So I'm gonna give you one actually that I thought was actually absolutely brilliant
Okay.
because I only just discovered him, but then I went on his page and I was like, oh my gosh, like I love his stuff. Like he is so amazing. Actually, you said not Nigerian or South African.
Not Nigerian or South African.
Oh,
You can tell me
actually.
the Nigerian South African one after.
Okay,
But
no. Christy Brown. That's a really easy one. Like the brand Christy Brown.
okay. And where is she from and what does she create? And
She's from Ghana. I think her name is Aisha. She's from Ghana. She does the most amazing women's wear that are like, it just like elevates, like you just know, like when you're on a Christy Brown, like you immediately turn into like a power woman. Yeah, she's a brilliant, very talented designer. And I feel like she needs to be getting a lot more sort of like global more. I mean, she already has like a good audience, but I feel like she is a designer that is slept on. I would rate her very highly.
wow. I think I actually have come across Christy Brown, but I'll check that out. And to our viewers out there, if you want to drop names in the comments of any other designers that you think are currently slept on in the African creative space, so that's filmmakers, fashion designers, writers, musicians, please drop it in the comments. So I think to close off, I think this is a good way to close off, Itohan, to kind of tie everything that we've talked about today. When future generations look back at this era of African creativity, what do you hope they will say this generation got right?
Ooh. So I would say I would want them to feel that we were the generation who were so unapologetically ourselves, who we would rather have a no than be willing to compromise on our identity and who we were, and that we were super intentional about the spaces we showed up in. I would want our generation to be the generation that built the spaces in which we celebrate our talent, the generation that was able to establish a greater sense of Pan-Africanism and just really I want us to be like the generation that unified Africa.
And I think we're definitely living that right now. And I think that will definitely be said about us, or I should say about you and all the work that you're doing 20 years from now, 10 years from now. Thank you so much, Itohan. This has been awesome. And I'm really proud of all that you're doing and all that you're going to do in the coming years. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kate. And you are also doing something super brilliant as well with this podcast. I can't wait to see how it's going to grow and grow and grow. And yeah, I really look forward to just all that you're going to do. And, well done as well. It's brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you.